Garrett hid a sealed leather pouch inside my carry-on bag the night before we flew to New York. By the time we reached U.S. pre-clearance at Pearson, I had already moved it somewhere else. When the CBP officer pulled Nadine aside, unzipped her cabin bag, and set everything on the inspection table, the color drained straight out of Garrett's face. There are things that signal the beginning of the end, long before you are ready to name them. A lock screen turned face down on the kitchen counter. A tone of voice that shifts half a degree when a certain name comes up. An explanation offered just a little too quickly, as though it had been rehearsed before you even asked the question. My name is Vivienne. I am 36 years old. 4 years ago, I walked away from a litigation position at a Bay Street firm that I had spent nearly a decade earning because Garrett asked me to. He didn't say it exactly that way, of course. He said that his schedule was punishing, that someone needed to be present, that a woman with a husband building something real had better things to do than bill hours for other people's problems. I believed him. I believed him the way you believe, something delivered gently and with apparent love, before you have learned to count how many times the same argument has been used. Garrett is 45. He runs Transnorth Capital, a private investment firm in the financial district. He is the kind of man who enters a room and recalibrates it without appearing to try. Good suits, very clean hands, a handshake that communicates precision. I fell in love with the version of him who drove up to Muskoka on a Thursday afternoon, simply because I was sad and he knew it without being told. I spent years defending that version against everything that contradicted it. The night before our flight to New York, I was packing in the bedroom, while Garrett answered emails in his office down the hall. We were flying to Manhattan for a 3-day investment conference. Nadine, his director of investments, was on the same flight. I pack methodically. Everything has a place, and it is always the same place, which is how I notice immediately when something does not belong. The leather pouch was tucked behind the interior compression panel of my carry-on, compact, dark burgundy, slightly rigid. I had never seen it before in my life. I held it for a moment without opening it, then I did. Inside, a USB drive with a small piece of white tape labeled FMR Final in blue ink, a thin stack of documents on Transnorth letterhead, and a manila envelope sealed at the flap with a thickness that could only mean cash. I fanned the edge open just enough, US dollars in rubber-banded stacks. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and sat on the edge of the bed. FMR, Fort McMurray Residential. An Alberta development project Garrett had walked me through 18 months earlier, his hands moving across plans on the dining table, explaining how the oil downturn had gutted land values, how the project had cost the firm over $1.5 million before it was wound down. He had come home from the final meeting distracted and quiet, and I had made dinner and not asked too many questions, because that was what our marriage had become. Me not asking too many questions, calling it support. From down the hall, I could hear Garrett on his phone. His voice was very low, but the condo was quiet enough that a few words still reached me. She's the safest option. Nobody looks twice at her. She won't have any idea. I sat completely still. She won't have any idea. I did not cry. I am not entirely sure why, except that when a fear you have been quietly managing for a long time is suddenly confirmed, the body sometimes responds with stillness rather than sound. I took photographs of the pouch and its contents, replaced everything precisely, and went to wash my face. Nadine was already downstairs when the car arrived the next morning. She stood on the pavement outside the building with a structured tote over one shoulder and a rolling carry-on at her feet, its outer pocket unzipped. She wore the particular composed expression she always wore, not quite a smile but designed to read as warmth. When she saw me, she tilted her head and said, "Vivienne, you look well rested." I thanked her and smiled back. In the 4 years she had worked alongside Garrett, Nadine and I had been in the same room perhaps 20 times. She always called me by my first name, always asked after me, with a warmth that somehow suggested she already knew the answer before she asked. She was 38, relentlessly capable, the kind of professional who filed things ahead of their due date and remembered offhand comments you'd made 3 months ago. I had long understood, without Garrett ever saying it directly, that Nadine was the person he trusted most inside the company. I was beginning to understand exactly how far that trust ran. Pearson was its usual controlled Tuesday morning chaos. Garrett moved through it with the ease of someone who has long since memorized the fastest route through every terminal. He said he'd meet us through pre-clearance and disappeared toward the priority lane. Nadine checked her phone as we walked, half her attention elsewhere. Near the U.S. Customs and Border Protection pre-clearance area, there was a brief bottleneck. A large group from what looked like a school program, luggage scattered, a supervisor trying to organize 50 teenagers in matching jackets. Nadine paused to check the departure board above us. In that window of 60 seconds, I opened the outer pocket of her rolling case, transferred the leather pouch from my carry-on, and zipped her bag back up. 60 seconds, less probably. I straightened, stepped forward, and joined the queue. Nadine passed through the body scanner without any trouble. Her rolling case went onto the belt and through the X-ray machine. The belt stopped. An officer leaned toward the screen and pressed a button. The belt reversed. "Ma'am, can you step over here for a moment, please?" Something shifted in Nadine's face, barely perceptible, a tightening around the eyes, there and then controlled. She looked at the bag coming back toward her, and I saw the precise moment she understood that something was wrong. Garrett had come through the priority pre-clearance lane and was waiting on the other side. When he noticed Nadine wasn't moving forward, he came back around toward the secondary inspection table. He had on a navy blazer and the easy, boardroom-ready expression he'd cultivated for 20 years. That expression did not survive what happened next. The officer unzipped the outer pocket and lifted out the leather pouch. He looked at it. He looked at Nadine. He looked at Garrett. "Sir, does this belong to you?" Garrett opened his mouth and closed it again. "That's not mine," Nadine said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. The officer unlatched the pouch, the USB drive, the documents, the manila envelope. He opened the flap of the envelope and fanned the contents once, carefully, then looked up. Around us, the terminal moved at its ordinary indifferent pace. People pulling luggage, families searching for gates, a departure announcement for Calgary echoing overhead. But in our specific radius of 3 feet, everything had stopped. Garrett looked at me. I was standing near the barrier, holding my carry-on by the strap, wearing the expression of a woman who was as puzzled as anyone. I have never been a performer by nature. But I practiced law on Bay Street for nearly a decade, and a litigator learns early how to arrange her face. I tilted my head. "Garrett, what is that?" He swallowed, his jaw worked. No words came out. "Sir," the officer said, "we'll need you to come with us." The flight to LaGuardia was an hour and 40 minutes. The pre-clearance delay had taken another 35 minutes to sort through, though ultimately the cash declared was below the reporting threshold. Not by the comfortable margin Garrett had likely planned, but below. The documents and drive were logged. A supervisor spoke with Garrett privately for several minutes. I sat in a row of plastic chairs nearby and watched people spend $7 on a bottle of water. On the plane, Garrett sat beside me in silence until we were at cruising altitude. Then he leaned over and said, quietly, that I shouldn't read into what had happened, that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation he'd been meaning to walk me through. I turned a page of my book. The pouch was conference materials, he said. Working documents. The cash was for client hospitality. It hadn't been processed through expense yet, that's all. I said, in my carry-on. A pause. I put it in the wrong bag by mistake. Our bags look similar. Our carry-ons were different colors and different sizes. His was black with a silver TSA lock. Mine was slate gray with a small maple leaf keychain on the zipper pull that his mother Judith had given me for our first anniversary. They were not remotely similar bags. By mistake, I said again. Garrett looked at me with the patience he usually reserved for difficult clients. Vivienne, I need you to trust me on this. I turned another page. Outside the window, Lake Ontario was already a gray memory far below us. The thing about being trusted is that it requires a willingness to remain in a certain amount of the dark. I had been trusting Garrett for 4 years. I had trusted in return. It had felt like partnership. I was beginning to understand it had been management. The hotel was on Park Avenue. The conference suite spanned 2 floors. Garrett moved through it all with the particular ease of a man who has structured the environment to accommodate him. The dinner that first evening was the kind of formal event where the wine is chosen to signal things about the host. Garrett introduced me at each table as my wife, Vivienne, a sentence with a subject and an object and not much else in between. Midway through the main course, a man named Wesley, who managed institutional investments out of Calgary, shook my hand. and said he remembered Garrett mentioning I was a lawyer. I was, I said. Wesley nodded and raised his glass. Smart woman to have close to home, Garrett. Especially with everything you've still got moving through Fort McMurray. Garrett's hand paused on his wine glass for less than a second. Wesley moved on to something else. The conversation shifted, but I sat with everything you've still got moving through Fort McMurray and held it carefully, the way you carry something across a room without wanting to spill it. That night, after Garrett fell asleep, I opened my notes app and wrote down everything in precise sequence. The FMR label on the USB, the stacks of US cash, the documents with the numbered routing code, Wesley's remark. The Fort McMurray residential project that had supposedly cost the firm nearly $2 million and gone nowhere. If it hadn't gone nowhere. If it had simply gone somewhere I wasn't meant to see. The next morning, I told Garrett I was going to walk around and would meet him at the conference by noon. I walked 3 blocks south, found a branch, and presented myself at a teller window, asking whether a specific routing number was linked to a registered account. The teller was polite and appropriately unhelpful. I had anticipated that. What I actually wanted was simply to see the reaction when I showed her the number. A reaction that confirmed the routing code was familiar, institutional, real. It was. I thanked her and left. I found a coffee shop on Lexington and called Philip. Philip is 71. He went to law school with my father and spent 30 years in commercial litigation in Toronto before he retired. He is not technically my uncle. He has always been Uncle Philip. I called him because I needed someone who would think clearly, who wouldn't be frightened on my behalf, and who already knew what was legally at stake before I had to explain it. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting and then asked 4 questions, each one very precise. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Vivienne, if this is accurate, this isn't a marriage problem. This is a FinTrack matter. Undeclared cash movements, a numbered company receiving redirected project funds, structured transfers. The CRA would have interest, so would the OSC. I thought so, I said. Do you want to save the marriage, or do you want the truth? Outside the coffee shop window, a woman in a yellow coat was trying to flag down a cab that wasn't slowing down. I've been trying to save the marriage for 4 years. I said, I want to see what's actually been happening. He told me what to gather, what to preserve, who to contact if things escalated beyond where a personal lawyer could reach. He was calm and methodical, and did not tell me what to choose. He reminded me that what I had were indicators, not yet proof, that the difference mattered. I thanked him, and sat in that coffee shop for a while longer, just letting the morning move around me. I found Nadine in a breakout corridor just after lunch, while Garrett was on a panel. She was standing near a window with a glass of water and the expression of someone who had been making calculations since the airport. She saw me coming. She didn't move. I sat down at the small table beside her. Sit down, I said, not unkindly. She sat. The Fort McMurray funds didn't disappear in an oil market correction, I said. They moved. Through a numbered company, and your name is on it. Her jaw tightened. I'm not asking you to confess anything to me, I said. I'm telling you what I know, and then you can decide what to do with that. There's nothing personal between Garrett and me, she said. The sentence came out smoothed, pre-formed. She had prepared it. I didn't ask about that, I said. She looked at the glass in her hand. You signed off on the accounts, I said. That makes you the principal on paper, regardless of how Garrett structured it or what he told you the arrangement was. Nadine stayed quiet. Do you understand what exposure that creates for you? I asked. I understand, she said, very quietly. Why did you do it? She looked up. Her eyes were steady, but something behind them had shifted. He said it was a bridge structure, that the accounts were temporary. That once the Alberta deal cleared, everything would normalize, and there'd be no trace left. Did you believe him? She didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. I stood up. Whatever you decide to do next is your business. But I'd speak to a lawyer before Garrett speaks to one about you. I walked back toward the conference hall. My hands were completely still. That surprised me less than it would have a week ago. That evening, in the hotel room, I sat across from Garrett and told him everything. The sequence, the routing number, the call with Philip, the conversation with Nadine, Wesley's remark. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse him of anything I couldn't support. He listened. He let me finish. Then he sat with his hands on his knees for a long time. I put it in your bag because you were the only person no one would look at, he said. 14 words. The most honest thing he had said to me in years, and also the most damaging. The numbered company, I said. What is it, exactly? A long silence. A bridge account, he said finally. Nadine holds it on paper. It was meant to be temporary, a way to redeploy the Fort McMurray capital before the full fund restructure was done. It wasn't supposed to sit there long enough for anyone to notice. Is it legal? He looked at the window. Garrett. It's not straightforwardly legal, he said. I nodded slowly. I had already known the answer. I had known it since the first night in the bedroom. Some truths arrange themselves into a shape so clear that by the time someone finally speaks them aloud, you are not relieved so much as confirmed. And Nadine? Personally. No, he said immediately. She knew about the accounts, that's all. She thought she was doing me a favor. She trusted me. So did I said. He looked at me. I thought about the 4 years in this marriage, the career I had set aside, the apartment I had furnished and maintained and made warm, the dinners, the travel, the introductions at functions where I was my wife, Vivienne, and nothing else. I had made myself manageable, accommodating, reliably present, and in the end, the most useful thing about me was that nobody would look twice at my carry-on. I'm going home tomorrow, I said. Garrett started to say something. Not out of anger, I said, because I've seen enough to know what I need to do, and I can't do it from here. He didn't try to stop me. He knew me well enough by then to know there was no point. In its way, that was the most respect he had ever shown me. I flew back to Toronto on the early morning flight, a direct into Pearson, the city coming up gray and familiar through the window as we descended. My parents live in Oakville, and that was where I went. Straight from the airport, in a cab, my carry-on in the overhead space, my hands quiet in my lap. My mother Diane opened the door, looked at me for a moment, and stepped aside to let me in without asking a single question. She put the kettle on. My father came in from the backyard, sat down across from me, and didn't ask anything either. Just looked at me steadily and nodded once, the way he does when he understands something is wrong and doesn't need you to perform being fine. I stayed for 2 nights. On the second evening, my father said, "Are you going back to law?" I had been thinking about it since the coffee shop on Lexington Avenue. I think so, I said. He nodded again. Good, that's where you belong. In the weeks that followed, things moved the way serious things do when you stop trying to slow them down. Garrett cooperated with an internal review at the firm, and then with the OSC, and then with a CRA inquiry. Nadine retained separate counsel. The numbered company was unwound, the capital movements traced and documented by people whose entire profession is exactly that kind of untangling. I spoke with Philip regularly. I did not interfere in the process, and I did not obstruct it. I also filed for divorce. Not as leverage. Not in a moment of fury. I filed because I had spent long enough in a marriage where I had been managed, positioned, and eventually used, and I did not want to spend another day of my life in it. Garrett did not contest it. Whatever else he was not a man who couldn't recognize a point of no return. 3 weeks after I signed the initial paperwork, I called my old firm on Bay Street. I did not expect an immediate response. 4 years is a long time to be away from a practice, and I knew the market had shifted. But my former supervisor partner, Beverly, answered within the hour. Her message was 2 sentences. I've been wondering when you'd call. Come in Thursday. I went in Thursday. Marriages don't collapse because love disappears in an instant. They collapse because somewhere in the middle, one person quietly begins making decisions for 2. And the other person gradually allows it, and the gap between what you believed you were building and what you were actually living becomes too wide to cross without looking down. I found a leather pouch in my carry-on bag on a Tuesday night in February, and that was the thread that started everything unraveling. Not because I pulled it in anger, but because I had finally decided I wanted to see what was behind the curtain. I am not sorry. There are things a woman gives away in the name of partnership that she should never have been asked to surrender in the first place. Her work, her judgment, her right to know what is actually happening inside her own life. When you take them back, you realize they were never truly gone. They were just waiting for you to come back for them. I walked out of Pearson that February morning with nothing except what I had arrived with, And it turned out that was more than enough to start again.